Hi, welcome to episode 34 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we've all been living in these last few years, we are using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please spread the word and let your friends and family know about what we're doing on social media. Before we start today's conversation, I'm proud to say that episode 34 is sponsored by American Tributaries Travel, which is the company I formed back in June to take the spirit of this podcast and put it on the ground and get high schoolers in our country to travel more within our country. For more details, please check out americantributaries.com. Okay, on to today's conversation. I'm very excited to be joined by Brad Alaniz, who lives in Rhode Island and is a former shipmate of mine from the USS Bunker Hill, CG-52, where we were both assigned back in the mid-1990s, back when it was homeported in Yokosuka, Japan. Brad, thanks so much for joining me today. Happy Veterans Day, and can you share a bit of your story?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, so as Mike said, we were shipmates back in Japan. Seems like forever ago, but it's interesting how the people you meet in certain circumstances, you always know them. I've forgotten many more people than I can ever count, and there's a smaller group of people that I do remember, and Mike's one of them. So I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I guess it's purely coincidental that we're talking on Veterans Day, but we were talking before about, like, I guess some of your experiences in the Navy, but you were I think you graduated a year after me. And how long were you on Bunker Hill for?
I think it was 2 years.
Okay,
if I remember correct, 95 to 97. I think back then the standard tour was 2 years.
Okay. And did you want to be over in Japan, or did you want to be on that kind of ship, or what brought you over there?
It was both. So when about a month before you graduate, I think from ROTC and the academy, I went to the Naval Academy, graduated in '94. You pick your service, and you also do it's a ceremony, kind of a fun event where you pick your ship. And it's listed where it's homeported as well. So I know I wanted to go to Japan, and cruisers at that time were the newest and the best thing in the Navy. So I'm like, well, it's best of both worlds, and luckily I got it. So it was a combination of ship and place. And
yeah,
we ended up liking Japan so much. I think I did 5 tours there in total.
Did you really? Wow.
It's the place I've lived longest in my life, except where I grew up in Minnesota. Only by a couple of years as well. So.
Wow. Did you pick up any fluency with Japanese?
I won't claim to be anywhere close to fluent, but if we were, suddenly abducted by aliens and dropped in Tokyo, I could probably get us out just by speaking Japanese. But I wouldn't. My wife actually got much better. Gretchen, you remember her? She ended up teaching at a high school as the English teacher. At a private Japanese school. So,
oh wow!
So she became my translator. We go and order sushi, or an asahi to go with the sushi. I'm like, Gretchen, order me this. Okay, got it. And she would go. So
5 tours. So how much time was that total?
Probably close to 15 years, 14 years.
Wow.
Maybe.
Wow.
So I went from Bunker Hill over to the aircraft carrier that was homeported there with us, the Independence. That was a great tour because I was a steam engineer, which I never imagined, And then as a kid, loving like trains and things like that, it's a lot of the same technology, the boilers and everything. It was really fun tour. Did some stateside tours, ended up going back to Japan to be department head on a different cruiser, Cowpens.
Okay, yeah.
And I was on there for almost 3 years. In between, one of the stateside tours that I did was on a destroyer, old Spruance class DD, which we don't have anymore in the Navy. Old destroyer, and we did a deployment to Japan. I got to the ship and they're like, we're leaving in a month. I'm like, where are you going? Japan. I'm like, oh geez, why did I even pack? I should have just left my stuff. And then I ended up being XO on a destroyer in Japan as well. Came back to the States for a different tour, went back to Japan to be on the flagship, the Blue Ridge, on part of 7th Fleet staff. So
Oh
I ended
wow.
up being one of the people that bosses around the ships that we used to be on.
Oh
So it was
wow.
really fun. So it turned into, one, two, three, four, that's five. Yeah. So
So Blue Ridge was still out there?
yeah, they still are today. They're right
Wow.
there. So in fact, they just had, if you go on Stars and Stripes, you can look, they have great pictures from last month. I think it was last month, might have been ended to September, the first Yokosuka Friendship Day since COVID. I don't know if you
Mm.
remember those, but we open up the base to all the locals, and they flood in by literally the tens of thousands.
Mm.
And they have food booths and fireworks, and it really is a friendship day. It's really neat to try to build your relation between the community and the city there, because they do a lot. They do a lot for us, and we're there to help defend them. It's really mutually it's a mutual friendship. It's really fun. It's a fun day.
Yeah.
And I'm
No,
sorry I missed it. Sorry I missed it,
yeah.
because when we had it, when I was on Blue Ridge, usually the Blue Ridge is the ship they open for tours as well. So I would volunteer to lead tours, because I just like talking to the locals, and it was really
yeah.
fun. And practice my Japanese that I don't remember anymore.
I know I still have like one rusty phrase that I can say to somebody in Japanese that impresses them, but then puts me in trouble because then they think I actually can speak Japanese. And to me, the key phrases for us was like "Kono densha wa doko ni ikimasu ka?" Like that's
Yeah.
where's this train going? Toyota wa doko desu ka?
I, right. I found that if you look lost enough, somebody will come up and help you, which
Yeah,
is really neat.
yeah.
And there's places in the United States that'll happen as well, but in Japan it's kind of universal. Just look helpless, and somebody is going to come up to you and say, "Oh, you look like you're helpless. Can I help you?"
Yeah. Now it was what was your like when you well, I guess I mean a couple of things. Just like to go to your experience on the carrier. When I was like when I've talked to people, I guess like after the last few years and all of the I don't know, I guess like the stress or the division that we're feeling, right? One of my like kind of reference points is being on an aircraft carrier, and I was only on it for one day, right? So I visited, I think, when our ship went to the Persian Gulf in '95. I don't know how I swung it, but I got to take the helicopter over to Independence. I was there for like one day, and then I got catapulted off the aircraft carrier, and I got to go like to Bahrain, like ahead of the battle group. I don't know how that happened or why it happened, but it did. But being on an aircraft carrier for that one day, really, you realize that it's a floating city, and you realize all the different things that go into making a community able to function, right? And when I talk to people about at least my perceptions of like how we live as a country is that there's lots of different types of people and there's lots of different backgrounds, and those we almost need by necessity. And I'll say like you can't have the quartermaster for your ship who's plotting where you're going may have a very different background than the person who likes to work with like nuclear reactors or steam engines, or swap the decks, or listen in on conversations in Arabic, whatever it is. But like everybody is going to come from different backgrounds, and I think we need to have more tolerance for all those different backgrounds, because like I think what we were talking about before, like what I felt in the Navy is like the politics just never kind of came up. It might be there, but it just didn't come up because there was a common mission. Did you always did you feel that, and did you ever kind of see any change in how like those ship communities existed from like when you were first there to when you were getting out?
uh, I saw the same thing, and I didn't see it change. It was like that when I left as well. I think there's a misconception that the military, the people in the military, are some kind of monolithic type of person, and that's not true at all. The variety that's in the country, in the population, that exists in the military, and in fact, the military often has led the way in diversity and getting to people from different backgrounds to work together, whether it be integration or equality for women, or people from even different countries, can come and serve in the Navy. If you remember, we had people that weren't even American citizens yet working side by side, and it was not an issue at all. It wasn't, are you invading my ship? Are you trying to take my job? It's like, oh, it was, thank you for your help. I'm glad you're here. I'm happy to work with you. And that didn't change. I don't know. I mean, I've been out for, some time now, so I don't know what it's like now, but from my experience with my students when I was teaching over at the War College, it's still the same. Even more diverse and more inclusive than even when we were in, which is
Yeah.
great. I really like that.
Yeah. I mean, what I remember actually when thinking about like I guess the Navy's adaptation to things was when like I think when we were on the Bunker Hill back like this is like I was there in '94, you got there I guess in '95 to like
Right.
'97 or so, like the women were just starting to be introduced to combatant as like assignments. So I mean I think in one respects that was certainly I think late in coming compared to what women at least had the possibility of doing.
Hmm.
But it's also but I think it is a very complicated situation to be in. But I'm glad that we got to go through that. And what I enjoy seeing now is like on LinkedIn, I'm seeing posts from like friends in the military who are, celebrating, some woman who, became the captain of a combatant ship. And that was something that seemed like a fantasy many years ago, but like it happened. And I guess as you get to me, at least, you realize like sometimes change takes some time, but it's really
Right.
heartening to see what has changed in the generation that we've gone through.
Right. Right. And in fact, where I work now, I work with a lot of submarine officers, and some of them are women, and that
Mm.
would not only on combatants now, they're serving as department heads, and soon eventually XOs and COs of submarines at sea, which would have been totally unheard of back when we were on Bunker Hill. It'd be like never, that's never going to happen. Like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, well, just wait, we'll make it happen.
Yeah. So when did you get it? When did you get out of the Navy?
Um, it was a couple of years ago. It was, I think, the spring of probably 19. It was right before pandemic started.
Okay.
Um, but I stepped, right into a civilian job as an analyst type of person. Kind of red October type stuff. I can't talk about all of it, what I do here, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting stuff. So I'm still with a lot of active duty military folks and civilians, and so I still see the culture
Okay.
every day, actually.
And where are you living? And then where are you? Can you say where you're assigned to, like where you're working?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I live in Rhode Island. Been here. I've been here for about 6 years now, and then not including a couple of years of schools over the career, because a lot of our Navy schools are here in Rhode Island as well. Newport's always been a huge Navy town since the Revolution, actually. Side note on history, that the French fleet that went and cut off the British that let us win the Revolution, essentially, down in Yorktown. They came from here. They sailed out of Newport. That's where they
Oh,
were.
wow.
So the French fleet used to be anchored right out. I could see from my house, if I stood on the roof, I could see where they would anchor. So there's a
Wow.
lot of history here. So the Navy's been here since before there was a Navy, really. So it's really interesting. So what was the original question when I got out of the Navy? Yeah. So um, I taught at the War College here in Newport for 3 years, and then I retired from that job. I retired from that job.
Mm. So one of the, I guess, I actually had the kind of cool experience of yesterday. I got to talk to my son's fifth grade class. So it was like 120 10-year-olds about what it means to be a veteran. And they'd never done that
Cool.
before. So I was kind of glad to have that opportunity. But I think one of the things that I guess gets overlooked when you talk about veterans is the transition from being military to becoming a civilian. So like for you, is it how difficult or easy is it to do that transition? Because I mean it happens to everybody unless you just kind of flat out just retire and stop working.
Yeah, it's a lot to do with I think where you go from the military. So I had a very soft landing, because I work with probably half my colleagues are civilians like me, and half are active duty submarine officers. And I work on a base over in New London, over in Connecticut. It's the Northeast, so it's a different state, but it's still not very far away. Is Another side note, interesting how small some of these places are. So Rhode Island, my dad lives in Houston, and I looked on a map, and Rhode Island can fit inside Houston. I mean, not population wise, but area wise. You could take the entire state, drop it onto Houston, and it would be within the city boundaries.
That's
So
crazy.
it's really neat. I mean, but these states were marked out back when people had to walk where they're going, or they took a horse if they were lucky. If they
Yeah.
had a horse. So um, anyway, point being is it's in Connecticut. It's not too far away. It's a beautiful drive. I love it. But it was a very soft landing, because there's a lot of people. A lot of the civilians there are prior military folks, anywhere from senior enlisted to officers that were captains and admirals. The civilian that works next to me is a reserve admiral now. So they get it. It's a kind of a camaraderie that is still there, whether you're civilian or military. I have no friends that have gotten out and had a harder time. When you go to some place where the 10 o'clock meeting doesn't start at 10 o'clock. That kind of stuff drives me crazy still.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I'll ever get over that. And I'll make snide remarks like, what time does the 10 o'clock meeting start again? And they were like, well, it's only 10:15. What's the problem? So I'm glad I'm still kind of I'm not a very regimented person in my personal life. I'm pretty scatterbrained and I wander and I have a short attention span. But when I'm at work, it's a different atmosphere, and I like it. I miss that, and I don't know how I would do in a place that's just kind of loosey goosey. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, it's a big change. When I over the summer I did like a little pilot trip with my daughter and a few other like kids her age to kind of test my concept for my company of like getting high schoolers to travel, and we went to South Carolina, and one of the places we went to was the Army base Fort Jackson down there, and what was interesting was kind of not really thinking about the military in terms of like the military, like you said, like monolithic, and there's a certain like thing about the military, but just more thing about it as like a community, and like there's a culture there, and not like a culture like it's an oppressive culture or something, but just it's the way you do things because it works best for the Navy, and or the Army, and like in the military, time and obsession with time is pretty important when you have operations that depend on like things happening at the right second or maybe even the right
yeah,
nanosecond in this day and age.
yeah, yeah,
So it behooves people in the military to be very obsessive with time, but in other parts of the civilian world, loosey goosey with time isn't a big deal because it's just that's not what's relevant, I guess, for them. It can get maddening, but at least that's kind of like what I've seen.
yeah, yeah. And I'm not passing any judgment.
Yeah.
I'm just
No.
in the end, the point was that I had a group of people that I work with now that have kind of the same group of life experiences that I have had. So
Yeah, no, for sure.
that helps. I don't know how much of that. I didn't do it on purpose. It was just that was the best opportunity right when I was getting out. I didn't. In fact, I was still active duty on terminal leave. The leave you take when you retire, get out. I was still on active duty when I started this job.
Uh-huh.
I was at one of those briefs you have to do while you're getting ready to retire, and there was a headhunter there basically, and kind of looked at everybody's backgrounds and pulled me aside during one of the meetings. He's like, "Do you want a job starting Monday?" It's like, well, that sounds great. So I've never had the experience of, and it's kind of bad because I wish I did have the experience of having to do a job hunt and having to do interviews and resumes and things like that. I've never had to do that, and I feel like I've missed out kind of on that. I'm not really good at selling myself anyway. I'm pretty. I don't try to be humble. I just am. I don't like to brag about accomplishments or, hey, look at me. And I think you have to do that to try to get a job in the civilian world. And I know people that had a hard time doing that when they're getting out of the military, trying to go sell themselves. It's one of those life experiences I haven't had. And I feel like I've missed out on that. Maybe it's something like you don't want to do. Maybe it's, maybe I'm lucky. Maybe people are like, oh, don't complain. It sucks. It's no fun,
Yeah, I mean, if you can get there without having to do that, that's certainly a better way of doing things.
So I guess where I was going with that is I didn't intentionally look for, oh, I can't hack it in the civilian world. I'll get mad at people that aren't on time. None of that happened. It just happened. I just happened to land there, and it was probably for the best for me.
Yeah. No, and I say that more just in terms of like, I think with the idea of like kind of community and culture is something that I think sometimes has more limited meaning than what it really is, which is I think like when you're in, like when I was a lawyer, there's a lawyer community and there's a certain type of way you do things because you need to. Like if you're a lawyer, you have to be OCD because if a period's in the wrong part of a number, that could be the difference between somebody owing $10,000 or $10 million or 10 million and 10 billion. So you get
Yep.
trained to have to be that OCD. And I mean, it's probably not much different than being in the military in that respect, but that's been kind of, for me, is an interesting way of just thinking about how all the different types of communities and cultures there are, and how they arise and why they arise.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree.
So,
And at work, some of the civilians that I work with, particularly me, because I'm in a very small subgroup that we do some pretty advanced analysis type work. They have not been in the military. These are civilian PhDs, math and physics mostly, and they have their own approach. It's an academic, scientific approach, and so I'm in the role. I because I have a foot in both worlds, so I translate. So the military active duty officers will come in and say something, and the scientists will look at me befuddled, and I'll explain what they said. So this is what he meant. This is what we have to do. And they're like, oh, okay, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Brad. And then the other way around too. The scientists will throw a bunch of math and science at me. I say, we have your answer. Here it is. And then the military officers will look at me befuddled, like, what did the guy with the big brain just say? I said, here's what he said. He means you have to do this. And so I'm kind of a cultural translator, if that's a thing. That's really my job now. And I really like it. It's fun. It's fun. Yeah.
So did you, I mean, you work with submarines, but you never had a submarine assignment when you were in the military?
No. When I was a midshipman, before I got commissioned, I spent 3 days on a submarine, which I tell people was 4 days too long. I did not like it. I would have been the worst submarine officer in the world. I like sunshine. I like going outside. I like being able to look out a window and hearing birds, and you can't do that when you're 500 feet underwater. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
No, so it wasn't the submarine experience so much as it's the kind of analysis and the math and the translation things that I do that help. So I've learned a lot, since I've been there, but no submarine experience except that one awful 4 days.
Will you get to go on a submarine, or do you have to go on a submarine as part of your job?
I certainly hope not. I could probably arrange to get myself on a submarine, because we go out and do exercises and things, for short periods of time. Go out for a few days and come back. And I could arrange myself to go out there, but I'm not going to, and nobody's asked me yet. So, which is good.
It's a different. I mean, I guess the world has kind of come full circle, I think, in some respects, because I feel like when we were first coming out, like when I started ROTC at Penn, it was August 1989, and there was still a Berlin Wall up, and by the time we came out, it's like there was no enemy, right? I mean, like when we were on Bunker Hill in the mid 90s, there was no enemy, and I guess that's kind of, we're starting to coalesce. We've had like one kind of enemy that we were focusing on for a while, and now it seems to be kind of coalescing around different. I guess we're almost back to where we started, in that there is some kind of big enemy out there.
Yeah, the phrase they're calling it is the great power competition again. Yeah. Which I don't. It's weird. If you just knew me and didn't know I was in the Navy, you would never imagine that that's something I would do. I mean, I don't like great power competition. I kind of like to. I'm an idealist, and I mean that in a good way. Sometimes people are like, "Oh, you're just an idealist, Brad." I'm like, "Well, thank you. I appreciate that."
Yeah.
It would be great if there wasn't competition like that in the world, and if there weren't, if there weren't, people invading their neighboring countries and people building, huge fleets to try to take, renegade provinces, in their words. I wish that kind of stuff didn't go on, but it does. And so I'm glad there's people that are willing to just stand up and try to push back against, really the darkness and the less good aspects of human nature. And I'm proud to be one of those people. I know that, I don't know, but I suspect, and people have told me, I could move to the civilian world and make, lots more money doing something, moving imaginary, paper around in a stock market, or working for a bank and trying to buy up other people and all these things that, I mean, those people need to do those jobs, and I get it. And that's what makes the economy go around, but it wouldn't be fulfilling to me at all. I would come home and going, what good did I do today? And I need that. So it's a personal thing. Like I said, nothing against those people. And a lot of my friends do that kind of stuff. And it's necessary, but it's not for me.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, and I think like I used to be a lawyer, so like I saw that world, and it didn't work for me, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that the healthy thing to think about is that we're all kind of interdependent. It's like we talk
Right.
about like being on the aircraft carrier, but on top of that, all these different professions are kind of interdependent. We need all of them, and I think it's about kind of having the right balance and the right level of like I guess respect and maybe awareness of where you stand in the hierarchy. I think there could be maybe a little bit more humility maybe amongst some professions more than others, but I think
Yeah.
that they all matter. And when people complain about technology, and I'll raise my hand, I definitely do that sometimes, but at the end of the day it's allowing us to have this conversation, and it allows
Mm.
people to do so much more than they could in the past. So there are problems, but sometimes I think it's easy, people are inclined to maybe just kind of knee jerk condemn something altogether instead of kind of holding back a bit and appreciating the good and the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. And it may be a simplistic analogy, but I think society is kind of like maybe a football team. You can't have a football team that's made up entirely of punters or quarterbacks or offensive linemen. You need all the different positions to make a team that can collectively do something. And so that's how I view society. Is not is what can society do for me, but what's my place in the bigger scheme. What's I'm a jigsaw. Everybody's a jigsaw puzzle piece. Where do I fit in the whole puzzle? And all the pieces, are different shapes. So
Yeah.
this is my shape. This is where I belong.
Yeah. Yeah. So how have you enjoyed becoming a New Englander?
I like it, and this is where there's a a, a kinship between Upper Midwest where I was from and the people out here. We're all Yankees. So, and there's I like the history part of it. I have a finger of interest in all sorts of different topics, and one of them is history, and especially local history. And I like to learn about a place when I get to it, learn all about it. Where the people come from, who was here before, how did the place that it was turn into the place that it is. Um, and I usually here, especially in Rhode Island, it's real very deep history, 400 years, of European history and thousands of years of indigenous folks before that. And now it's a big mismatch, a big mishmash of all those people's histories coming together. And I've found out enough and just been curious enough that I now teach people that have grown up here their whole lives. I point out things to them that they didn't know. I'm like,
Really?
we'll be, at the grocery store or something, and somebody, will mention something. What about that little cemetery over there? I'm like, oh, let me tell you about that little
Huh.
cemetery. That was the farmer that was here in 1680 to 1700, and his barn burned down when the British came, and that's their old family plot, and that's the story about the cemetery. And they're like, I never knew that. I was talking to the cashier at the grocery store down the street the other day. I was teaching her about the cemetery that's literally on the other side of the parking lot.
Mhm.
She did not know that. She'd been here for 50 years. She's lived in the town. I love doing that kind of thing. It's just
Yeah.
fun. I like, I'll get going, and I think I start boring people. They're like, okay, Brad, that's enough. Got it.
Yeah. the one. I mean, my year living in Newport, and I lived on Franklin Street, right by the
Okay.
post office. Um, was really a very very fond memories. And I grew up in the suburbs, and I live in the city, and I can't necessarily picture myself living in lots of small towns, but there was something kind of like quaint, but still. I don't know. I don't know if say worldly isn't quite the right word, but there was something really to me like I really loved Newport. And I'm jealous that you still get to kind of live in that area.
Yeah, it is a neat place to live. I really like it. You mean the post office downtown, the big one?
Yeah, right by
Yeah,
the waterfront.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can walk there in 20 minutes.
Uh,
In fact, sometimes in the mornings, I'll get up in early morning and I'll go running, and sometimes I'll run downtown. Just early morning, there's nobody there. It's just these
yeah,
old buildings and the seagulls and the fog signals. I got my dog
yeah.
here. She's paying some
I
attention. Um, I really like it. I don't remember what the question was, but yeah, it
think
is
I
nice.
think
It
this
is
is
nice.
just fond reminiscence about Newport right now.
Yeah, it's neat history. It's everything from there's still colonial buildings here. There's a pretty active tribal culture for the indigenous people that were here before. They've got a voice, more so than in some places maybe. There's the oldest synagogue in the country is here in Newport. I don't know if you remember, it was right up the
Yeah.
street from the post office, right?
Okay.
El Toro is up there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the this place where they have signs up where George Washington slept here. He really did, in some of these buildings. Wow. One of my colleagues lives in a building it's a house that's from 1726, I think. I mean, it's maybe 46. What's 50 years here and there when you're talking about 3 centuries, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, creaky floors and ghost stories and things. And I love that kind of stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah. 2 questions, and one of them is really ignorant because I just don't remember the map of Rhode Island. But like Rhode Island is Rhode Island, but how much of the state is actually an island? Like, what's the island part of Rhode Island?
So that's an interesting story. So it started out. Rhode Island was originally the island, Aquidneck Island, right? Most of the state is actually not on the island; it's right. On land. It's a little. For people who aren't familiar with that, it's just a little rectangle kind of carved out between Connecticut and Massachusetts and the ocean. A teeny little maritime border with New York down in the southwest on the water. So it was Rhode Island was the island, and it was a couple stories about why it was called that. One story was that Verrazano, like the bridge guy in New York, he was sailing around the island and thought it reminded him of Rhodes over in the Mediterranean. That's one story. The other story is that it's from the Dutch word for red, which sounds like road. I can't remember how to spell it. It's Dutch. Anyway, he was sailing around the island, a Dutch explorer, and noticed the red clay on some of the beaches and decided that the island should be called Red Island. So it's kind of a local debate. You're on one side or the other why it got named that. And I would say there's 10% of people that care. The rest of the people just say that's the name of the state. Just deal with it. And it was Rhode Island and Providence Plantations until just a couple of years ago was the whole name of the state.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Providence was the original big city that Roger Williams went up and founded. And he called it Providence, the normal word of Providence, like good fortune. And plantations back then was just an English word for a colony. But over the years, it's that. So it was Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. So it was the island here and then the city of Providence.
Okay, I see.
So and then he carved out a state from what was part of Massachusetts for religious freedom reasons. So they used to call it Rogue Island, like ROUGE, because all the troublemakers would move to Rhode Island, so they didn't have to live with the Puritans up in Massachusetts. So that's why there's Protestants here, there's Catholics here, there's Jewish people here. It was kind of a religious freedom zone, really. Nobody cared what religion you were. You could build your church, build your synagogue, build whatever you want. Nobody cared. In Massachusetts, they cared a lot. Those two areas have combined into Rhode Island Providence Plantations. And then, like I said, a few years ago, just because there's, for some people, or for a lot of people, there's negative connotations with the word plantation now.
Sure. Yeah.
And even though historically that doesn't apply to why that was part of the state's name, it's still a word that, raises some emotions in people. So they voted and the state legislature said, yep, nope. And then Governor Raimundo, who's now the Secretary of Commerce for the country, she signed the executive order and said, nope, we're just Rhode Island now, which makes sense. Okay. That's what everybody calls it anyway. Maybe too much. This is what I mean. I go on and on, so I can see you can throw something through the screen.
Excuse me. Part of this whole, for me, the podcast has been talking to people about places that I don't know, but I think there's even one of the things that's very, humbling is you realize there's just so much you don't know. I don't know about South Carolina, say, or Texas, so I'll talk to somebody from there, or but I also don't necessarily know as much as I might think I know about Rhode Island, or frankly, even much of my own city. So there's, you should always be curious, and there's just so much that you don't know. So you kind of alluded to this, but just having a discussion about, New England, can you, I guess, based on all your time there, is there a difference to the type of people or the culture in Rhode Island versus Connecticut or versus Massachusetts? Is there anything that you've kind of noticed in your 6+ years there?
Yeah, I have. I've noticed Rhode Island folks, in many cases, have been here for many generations, and they're kind of proud of being in a way the black sheep, because just the way the whole state started is all the people that couldn't follow all the rules came and made their own state. And there's still a little bit of the rebelliousness, but they're also, fiercely part of the greater, New England. I don't want to call it a tribe, but the New England, society. So they're, much to my chagrin, and they're fierce, Patriots fans, and the Bruins, and there's kind of this collective, it's the New England teams. They're not it's New England Patriots, right? They're not the Massachusetts Patriots. They're not the Connecticut Patriots. They're not the New Hampshire Patriots. New England Patriots, and so there's that kind of collective feeling as well. So they're a different type of family member, but they still part of the family up here. And there's not many places, or if any place, maybe parts of the South to some degree, maybe where there's kind of a regional identity, maybe the Midwest, but not really. There's no Midwest Patriots. There's the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers, and there's different. Thinking of sports teams is an easy analogy to how people group themselves. There's a collective up here. Is, hey, we're a special region, and they take pride in being kind of the birthplace of the rest of the country. The 13 colonies we're up here, and then down the coast, towards South Carolina and North Carolina, places like that.
Yeah. My perception is there is like definitely like something like there's not really anything that there's not really like a New York culture like the way you're talking about it. I don't know there's really like a mid-Atlantic culture. I think you see that more maybe like in the South. Like there's like Southern, American South like cookbooks. So there's a certain kind of regional identity there that ended up by you that I can't necessarily relate to as much because I don't see that in the New York area, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland. Like I don't see anything like that.
It's been interesting to me because although I've been here for a long time, I'll never be a real Rhode Islander. I mean, no matter, I could be here. It would be my great grandkids, maybe if we stayed here, they'd maybe finally get their membership card, to be a real Rhode Islander. Not that everybody hasn't been very welcoming and everything like that, but it's like there's some places, where you, as soon as you move there, you're one of them. Like you move to Los Angeles, you're a Californian. You just are, not because you live here. So now
New York City is the same way.
Yeah, and it's not like that up here. It's people are very conscious of how long they've been here, and they'll tell you, well, I've been here for 8 generations. And I'm like, well, that's not even possible. You know how long ago 8 generations was?
Really?
Don't do the math for me. That's how long. That's what the story is. Not sure where I'm going with that, and it's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing, and so it's been a learning experience for me, which I really like. I think in a lot of cases you can see a lot more looking from the outside than you can from just being in one place all the time. And that's part of what I liked about being in the Navy is we got to go all over the place and see new places all the time. I like doing that.
Yeah, no, it's the Navy definitely lives up to the slogan, at least that we saw back when we were coming of age, like see the world.
Yeah.
And it's very illuminating to have that opportunity to drop into different bases or different communities, and whether it's like for Newport, just having that 1 year, to me, I don't know if it like made a difference in my life, but it definitely was a very it left its mark that I that's unshakable.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't get to really see the world in my case. I got to see all of Asia a lot. So I have to think very hard to think of a country in Asia that I haven't been to multiple times. And again, coming from the outside, it's neat to see. And I would always try to find whatever tour I could find, to like, hey, we're going to this museum, we're going to this tour, we're going to do that. And I would sign up for all of it every time. And I like to kind of bring some of the things I learned there back, if somebody says, oh, that's Asian food, I'm like, what does that mean? Well, it's like saying that's, Western Hemisphere food. What does that mean? It's like, oh, look at those Chinese people over there. I'm like, no, they're clearly Korean. They're actually speaking Korean. They're eating Korean food. They're not China. And if you call them Chinese, they'd probably be pretty upset. So, and people I don't think do it out of malice. They do it because they haven't had that experience that we got to have.
Well, I think to me, like what I find but it's both like it's great to like learn about all the differences, right? When you've lived there for a while, but you also realize that like there are areas where I really don't know the difference. Like I don't know the geography of Africa. I don't know.
No.
I don't know Central America. So I think if you give yourself a second to step back, you realize while it's great to know some stuff, you have to be forgiving because there's so many other areas where you don't have that kind of level of knowledge.
Right, right. Yeah. It's I think gives you insight into things going on in the world as well. It, for instance, Ukraine and Russia, I could, go on and on about that history, and how they're part of, the greater, Slavic culture, but they're different countries. They have different histories. For the vast majority of history, Ukraine was not part of Russia. They were their own thing. And so, that all those subtleties are lost if you don't pay attention and try to understand.
Right. Did you read books on that, or did you have some assignment that was connected to that
Um,
area?
I've always been interested in Russian culture. In high school, I was an exchange student over in Belarus in Minsk
Oh wow.
for part of a semester in my senior year, and I can't get into too much, but I still use some of my Russian language stuff at work, in certain areas, and I can provide insights to the people at work about why they might be doing something that they're doing or where they're coming from. Not agree with it, but I say here's their viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
As wrong as it is, here's how they got to that point, and not even they, maybe just decision leaders or things. And,
Right.
or when the Ukrainians say, they make some claim, I'm like, here's why they're saying that, and they're actually right about this part. They're not so right about this part, but they mean well. Not explaining this very well, but that's where it came from. It's just always been interested in that part of the world, and so
Yeah.
I've got some insights into it.
I think like there's a certain like living in Japan, right? When
Mm-hmm.
we were in Japan, and to me, one of the most uncomfortable experiences I ever had was going to the Tokyo Edo Museum, because they had a section where they talked about all the firebombing of Tokyo, right? And
Remember that?
and
Yeah,
they make the
remember that.
point of like saying like I don't know if this is correct, but it's something about like there's actually more damage done to Tokyo than was done by the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima or Nagasaki,
It's
like
true,
structural damage. So
and people killed as well.
yeah. So like when you're an American standing there and it's yeah and it's it's I think it's probably kind of clear like if you're like there and you've got like your military haircut and you're a white guy, you're probably an American because I don't know of many other like white like countries that would have that many white like people that would have the
Right.
military haircut that would have the presence in Tokyo. So like it's most likely your country. It kind of changes how you see things, and like you go to like I know we're going like to Busan, and like you're traveling and you're seeing these sites and you'll see like the history of a site is like this was first built in the 1300s and then the Japanese came and they burnt it down in the 1600s and we rebuilt it and they took it down again. You see this kind of like back and forth, and you see like the different ways people perceive things, and with like legitimacy, but and also kind of realizing that like not to say two things can be right, but like you're saying, I think like there's people might see things a certain way because of the history that they have preceding that. And like to me, I don't know really much about like Russia and Ukraine, but like Russia did have an invasion from Germany of millions and millions of troops that came in, and they
Yeah.
suffered more death in World War II than like we did. So I don't not saying that what they're doing is right at all, but if you want to understand the problem to fix it, you've actually got to try to put those shoes on to see how they're seeing it. Is that
Yes.
correct? Would you agree with
Yeah.
that?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So in the case of Korea, one of the neatest places. I don't know if you ever went there.
Yeah.
It's in
Yeah.
Busan. I know we went to Korea, but I mean, if you went to this particular place in Busan, which is the United Nations Cemetery,
Oh no, I didn't get to go there.
it looks, if you just looked at it, it would look like Arlington or any kind of U.S. Military cemetery, but it's neat in that there's 20 or 25 different flags flying in each plot. They're like, here's the Polish, here's the Germans, here's the Canadians, here's the Australians, here's the Americans, here's the South Koreans. It's all these different countries that came together, to defend South Korea, and they it's immaculate, and it's one of the most revered places in the city there. Just how history changes, Um, in the case of Russia, yes, I don't agree with what they do, but you're right. If you look through the last 1,500 years of history, somebody from their West is continually trying to invade them. Is it the Germans? Is it the Teutonic Knights, Napoleon, whoever? Everybody wants to go invade Russia, and like I said, I don't agree with their response, but I can see how you would be paranoid. From looking west, seeing armed forces to your west, and being scared. Well, because the last 10 times that happened, they came over here and tried to invade us. So why is number 11 going to be any different?
Right.
Well, it is different. We're not going to go invade Russia, but having that understanding helps. If you can understand somebody's motivations, even if they're wrong, it helps you understand what's going on in the world, I think.
Right. And I think you can take that thing and then also apply it to like what's happening in our country and the politics, to where, to me, it's not necessarily, to say try to understand somebody else doesn't mean you have to give up what you're thinking. It's just, if you want to understand and get to some kind of like resolution, or just kind of get some kind of progress, you've got to step into those other shoes to see what they're thinking and feeling, and how they're interpreting what you're doing in the context, and what you're doing might be very different than what you think it is.
Yeah, exactly. I find one of the most, I try not to get into, political type arguments with people very often, unless I know they're going to come at it from that viewpoint. For one, you have to be willing to listen. And two, you have to be open to the possibility that you're wrong.
Yeah.
And they're right. Or that the right is neither of you. The right is somewhere between the two of you. And maybe if you listen first, and just ask somebody if they have some kind of opinion that you think is really strange or offensive or wrong. Just ask them, say, well, please explain why you think that. I'm listening. I'm here. I'm not judging. I'm not going to say a word until you tell me I can. Tell me why you think that's true. And sometimes it helps people. Sometimes they'll talk themselves out of their own argument. Sometimes, in some cases, they might convince you. You're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Hey, I think you're right. Thanks. I was wrong. But I think there's a dearth of, is that the right word? Not enough. People that aren't willing to come to a debate or a discussion with that possibility being present in their head that I might be wrong. It's possible that I'm wrong.
Well, the other interesting part of it is, I think, and my wife probably, Christy definitely bears the brunt of this, but there are things like in what I've been trying to do since March, which have been very frustrating. And she hears the unfiltered part of like what my mind is going through.
Is it maybe unfiltered, or maybe unfiltered?
No, it's definitely fully unfiltered, and I think that I don't know if there's really the solution or whatever, but I think there also is, like, sometimes you have to work things out, and I think that the idea of, like, if you're frustrated, I hope that everybody has somebody that they can talk to kind of work through the emotional part of how they perceive the world, to kind of get to a more centered way of looking at things. So I think that what I've seen, like, in our family is, like, we've got 3 kids, and, like, and there's lots of coming and going, and there's stresses, and people get stressed and explode, and it's not pretty sometimes, right? And if I'm trying to deal with some frustrations with, like, my project, like, Christy will hear all that the anger or the frustration or the emotion, but that allows me to process it, to become more censored. And it seems like a lot of the discussions that people have, it's like they're out in public with those emotional reactions, and they've never given themselves, so maybe they haven't had the chance to kind of work through the emotional element of their opinion to get to a more balanced reflection of what they actually think. I don't know if that's the case, but that's just based on, like, my most current experience, and to follow on what you're saying.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think with some of the, political arguments that get very emotional, if you peel back the onion far enough, what you get is that usually people with a strong emotion, it's coming from some sort of fear of something, whatever that might be. There's a whole, infinite number of things that could be, but usually behind, I found, and this is my opinion, that behind really strong political opinions is a fear of something. And if you can get to that, then you can get to the real causes. It's like treating the disease rather than the symptoms. We're all about treating symptoms in the political world, and we never really get down to the causes.
Yeah.
Which are no one, I think very few people are actually out to do harm to anybody else. I mean, those are, psychotic people. Those are people with some kind of mental problem. And there are very, very few of those, but we tend to group a whole collection of people that we disagree with as meaning harm. And I don't think they do. They're afraid of something, just like most people are. And their response to it is antithetical to maybe how we would respond to it. But their root emotional cause of that response is just some kind of human fear.
Yeah. Right. And I think the other thing is that what you end up with, like with social media, is that, and with people having cameras, that you can capture somebody having a very bad moment and
Yes.
have it out of context, and we all can do that. So, I mean, one of the things that I think about is like, it's a country of 330 million people. I mean, there are a lot of people just having a bad day. That could just be once in 1,000, or they could be having a really bad streak, and everybody's got a camera. So if they have that one meltdown and you capture it,
Yeah.
like that's it. They're tarred and feathered for life.
Right. Well, and you can apply that even to, my daily life, your daily life walking around. If, I constantly remind myself, and it's a newly learned skill, not today new, but, in the last decade or so, that if somebody says something or rubs me the wrong way, very, very, very likely it's not anything that I did or said. They might just be having a bad day. You don't know what's going on with somebody's life. Maybe their car is broken down. They don't have the money. Maybe one of their kids is in trouble at school. Maybe they're worried about something their doctor told them, or they think they might be getting fired soon, or whatever. People have a lot of baggage in their head, and you don't see that. It's all inside. What you just hear their words and see their actions, and I think selfishly you think it's about you, and it probably isn't. And so know that everybody's walking around with all this kind of stuff going on in their heads.
Yeah.
Some people are truly carefree, and I'm jealous of those people, but they're few and far between.
Yeah.
So it's just a quick bumper sticker. I wish you could slap it on your own arm or tattoo it. It's not about you.
Yeah. No, well, I guess it is about you in that, like, it's more it's like I yell at my Alexa sometimes when she doesn't respond. I'm yelling at the Alexa, like there's no feelings there, and to me that like encapsulates the fact that usually when there is some kind of outburst, it's about that person. It's like you're saying, if somebody's rude, has a bad day, it's not about you, it's about them. And when I'm yelling at, I can't say Alexa because every time I say it, she starts talking. But when I say something to my Amazon device and in frustration, I might be yelling at it. Like, why in God's name would I be yelling? Well, it's more because of my state of mind, not because of anything Alexa did. And I guess that drives home the point
so
you're saying.
I'll caveat that. The vast majority of people are not malicious. I think there's a fair majority of electronic devices that might be. My experience with one of my computers at work, I wanted to throw it out the window yesterday so badly. I'm like, you. The only answer to this problem has to be that you're just inherently evil. That's the only reason you're doing this.
That would be an interesting report for you to submit.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to because my computer would be smashed out in the parking lot. So I'd have to go borrow somebody's computer to submit the report.
Yeah. But yeah, and maybe this isn't, you may have thoughts on, but like, I see this kind of continuing advance of like technology, and like I see like these robots that now can kind of like run around and dance and whatever, and it makes me wonder like what the future of the military is like as things become more automated.
Yeah, that's a whole. We could spend another hour talking about. I mean, one of the things we work on where I work is unmanned vehicles of different types, and including underwater ones. I mean, specifically underwater ones because I'm working with submarines. So, I mean, there's ethical questions there too. What if there's a future war where it's just machines fighting machines? There's no people getting hurt at all. Is that okay then? I mean, isn't war inherently bad? But there's a whole range of opinions on this, even within the military. There's from the people that want to make Optimus Prime, with missiles and lasers and 20-foot tall robot that can just march out on a battlefield and smash everything, to people who think we should not do any of it at all. We should just stop as a moral imperative, and anywhere in between. It's a whole range. So it's a really interesting topic. If people want to read about it or look at it, there's all sorts of stuff online. Specifically, the part I'm interested in is the ethics of it.
Yeah.
So, and the difference. So there's a range between say you're going to bomb some terrorist camp or something. So there could be a pilot in an airplane that does that. There could be somebody on a ship that pushes a button like we could do with shoot a Tomahawk missile at it. There could be a predator where there's no person in the plane, but there's a person flying it from Nevada. Or where in some countries in the world, and you can guess which ones, and it's unfortunately including us too, working on autonomous vehicles where you just launch this thing with a set of rules that you hope you've programmed correctly, and it has the decision power to drop that bomb or not. You launch it and it comes back without the bomb. Well, what happened? Who's ultimately responsible for dropping that bomb? And I'm not going to pass any judgments on here. That's not what we're here to do. But it's
right.
The questions themselves are interesting, I think, and it's going to be it's not going away. There's a web blog that I wrote with one of my friends that I could maybe send you a link where we wrote an article about specifically the ethics of that, and maybe we should be. Yeah, I'll see. I'll find it. Specifically, the question was, should robots, robotic devices of all sorts, be regulated? Well, it wasn't robots. It was AI specific. Actually, it was artificial intelligence, which is related because that's what would go into these things, right? Should that be regulated just like nuclear weapons and chemical weapons and other weapons of mass destruction? Because an out of control AI could cause havoc. And so, like the right where you are, you're in New York, right? So the right piece of code in the right place could shut your power down for months. Yeah, and what's stopping anybody from doing that? Thankfully, it's mostly because for every bad guy, there's a good guy sparring with him online somewhere that none of us see. But there's a whole constant battle going on behind the scenes, preventing that kind of thing from happening.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be in the shadows of that. Those sorts of things should be transparent, I think.
Yeah. And I think, but to me, when we talk about this, it's like, I think you'd feel like our memory should be strong enough to know that with the good, there's bad. Like, we have the atomic bombs, and like you're even seeing now with social media, like the there's good, but there's definitely been a lot of bad that came about with social media and just kind of having unfettered access to people talking and communicating, putting out bad ideas, bots going on there, whatever else it is. Like in some respects, you're Russia, you can invade the US without ever stepping foot on our territory. You just set up some, fake accounts and just spread lies. You don't even have to do anything to foment violence.
Right.
So with AI, it's like almost like we know that there's going to be a downside to it, and that has to be taken as seriously as the positivity. And a lot of times what I get frustrated with a little bit is like you see people talk about technology and AI and stuff, and I'm like, but you're not even addressing the other side of it. And I think it's good to hear like, your, I guess, sobered, realistic thoughts about the technological advancement.
Yeah. And AI is interesting in that, I mean, if it's kind of like something that you let out of the box, and it might be hard to put back in. Not to say there's not some good that could come of it. For instance, the next generation of rovers we send to Mars, for instance, if they had really good AI, we could. Right now, it's literally minutes to tens of minutes to talk to something that's on Mars and have it come back to you. And that could be dangerous for that robot. You want to put the kind of AI in it that would let it steer around a hole in the ground by itself, or not get stuck, or find an interesting rock. Said, hey, that looks like an interesting rock. I'm going to take a sample of it and send it back, and not have a human have to go and tell it to do that. So there's lots of good that can come from AI too, or medical diagnosis or something. You know what? it's not obvious, but I think this person might have this kind of cancer, even though there's no obvious signs because of all these facts that they could put in. So data mining type of things.
Mm-hmm.
But for every, good use of it, there's a bad use for it. So I guess my point was my opinion, and there's people that disagree, but I think it should be internationally regulated, just like other things that have that potential are.
Yeah.
And not everybody will necessarily listen, just like, North Korea doesn't listen to us, to the UN. It's not us, it's the United Nations telling them, hey, please don't build any more nuclear weapons and set them off. They're like, we don't care what you say. And somebody's going to do that with AI as well. So there needs to be enforcement for the regulations as well. It's like, no, you broke the rules. This is the bad things that'll happen to you.
Yeah. And
they don't have to be violent things. They can just be, hey, we're going to shut you off from the internet. We're going to cut your underwater cables and you can't talk to anybody anymore. That kind of thing.
Well, it's interesting. Like you also, I feel like to me, there seems to be some kind of relation to what you're talking about, and like say sports and people getting frustrated with like analytics, because there's the data mining that you're talking about, and I think that like I don't watch a lot of sports, but I listen to it while I'm like washing the dishes and making meals and stuff. I listen to sports radio, and there's a lot of frustration because of the data mining that can happen, to where it removes like the human element to any of the sports, the sporting events that people watch. And I definitely sense like kind of a latent, I don't know if it's like fear, but kind of frustration with like losing your own agency over how things happen in the world.
Yeah, and I understand why some people would be frustrated with that. I don't know if I know enough about it to have an opinion about it. My initial gut reaction is, to like Moneyball. I bet you've seen that movie. That's a great movie. It's it's about data analytics in baseball. It's based on a true story. It is a true story. Part of me says, well, then why don't you do it too, so that you level the playing field back? Or either everybody does it or nobody does it. That's going to be our rule. It's if it's truly an unfair advantage, then it shouldn't be allowed. Just like things to be fair. But I think it's really neat. I like it, and there's a whole field. I get in debates with my mathematician colleague. He's a math PhD. And we have vastly different, this is going to sound really nerdy, but we have really different philosophies of probability. It's actually a real topic. Philosophy of probability. Look it up. So he takes, I'm trying to word this in a short way. He takes probability as a fact. Like this has a 1 in 6 chance of happening. You roll a die. And I'm like, and I say, no, it's a prediction. You don't know what's going to happen. You could roll 100 ones in a row. It's possible. It's a very small chance, but probability is only a prediction. He thinks it's a description of reality, and I disagree. Anyway, I can't get too far into it. That'd be a whole different podcast. But the data mining things in baseball is one of the things that's. Yeah, we put this game together, and they have, or I see it like with football predictions. The Vikings now have a 86% chance of getting to the playoffs. Like, you don't know that,
right?
The only probability you know for sure is for something that already happened, and it's 100%. If it happened, it had a 100% chance of happening.
Right. Yeah, and that's the beauty of the sports, is at the end of the day, and I guess as a Vikings fan, you've known lots of heartache. So
yeah, I know that I do. I can predict most of the time they're gonna blow it in the fourth quarter. That is a fact. There's no philosophy there. That's just fact.
So, but do you miss Minnesota, or do you feel? I mean, you're gonna move back there at some point soon, right?
I don't know how soon. As soon as I get my affairs here wrapped up, and I don't want to leave work in a lurch. And fortunately, part of my job, I'm still teaching at the War College online on the side. It's like another job. I can do that from anywhere, so I'll be able to do that from Minnesota. But I do miss it. Yeah, I mean, where you grew up and where you're from, unless it's really awful, it kind of always feels like home. So I know that's where I belong. I'm not ready to move back yet, and I wish I'll take a part of Rhode Island with me. I wish I could always stay here as well. Because I like it here. It's really pretty. I like being able to walk to the ocean. I like seafood for dirt cheap. I can get a whole lobster meal for what you can get chicken nuggets for at McDonald's, in Minnesota. I like that kind of stuff. It's really neat.
Yeah. Yeah, just the ocean and the views, and yeah, I'm sure. But Minnesota is very, different. Like, how close were you to the lake? I know Minnesota is the state of 1,000 lakes, so I get maybe there's a lake around
Yeah,
the corner from you.
you'd be hard pressed to get more than a couple miles from a lake anywhere in the state.
Oh, wow.
Maybe down south in the southern part of the state, but literally, I grew up with 3 or 4 lakes within biking distance. So that's a different kind of water. It's not the ocean,
Yeah.
but the ocean's not a lake either. So they're different.
Yeah, I've lived most of my life now, I guess, like somewhere on or near the water, and like when I go out of my building and can walk along the waterfront overlooking, like I can see downtown Manhattan, I can see
Yeah,
the
that's
Verrazano
cool.
Bridge. It's
That's really
something
neat.
to me, at least, very good psychically when you can kind of see all that, the water and the air.
Yeah, I do like that. So yeah, I don't have a firm timeline yet, and maybe I should. This is like I was talking about, like at work. If this was a work task, I would know exactly to the minute when things are going to happen.
Yeah.
My personal life, it's this whole probability or philosophy of probability. I have no idea. It'll happen when it happens.
Well, I'm sure you have other things to do today, so we should probably wrap up. But I guess before we close out, can I ask, like, what gives you hope at the end of the day?
The hope is that I encounter every day, including like right now, um, people that can have just calm discussions. And you didn't ask my politics, I didn't ask yours. It didn't matter. We were just talking about the world, talking about problems, talking about potential solutions. I see hope in people like at work, that every single person I work with could do something far more lucrative and financially rewarding, but they choose not to because they have a higher cause. And um, I see that especially in like the demographics of people that are voting. The younger people are voting today probably at a far higher rate than like you and my generation did. We were we're Gen X. We didn't care. We're like, whatever. The world's messed up. It's going to be that way. It's only going to get worse. You remember probably watching TV movies when you were a kid about nuclear war is going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do the drill where you get under your desk. The Russians are coming. The world's going to
Yep.
end, and it didn't. But I don't know if our generation really saved it.
Yeah.
We were busy, making the 80s.
Yeah.
But the young people today have a far more, I think, uh, feeling of obligation to society as a whole, and there's a lot more of them than there are of the old curmudgeon people. And I don't want to be an ageist, but the optimists are every day more and more outnumbering the pessimists, and that's optimism is what brings good change.
That's great to hear. All right. Well, Brad, thanks so much for for connecting and making time to have this conversation. And although people won't be listening to this on Veterans Day, we're recording it on Veterans Day. So happy Veterans Day to you.
And to you
And
back.
thank you. All right. Thanks. All right. And
Thank
take
you.
care. We'll be in touch.
Bye.